Greetings and salutations, travelers. Welcome back to the Inn of Planar Crossroads. And as always, welcome back to our Around the Hearth discussions. This time, we are discussing low fantasy. Since it's April Arcanum, we're discussing handling low fantasy in your games. And we'll define what we mean in just a minute. But before we do that, before I get too carried away with all the discussion stuff, let's go ahead and do our announcements and introductions. So I'll start us off so everybody can think about what they want to say. I am Adam L. Spain with the Inn of Planar Crossroads, and we welcome you to this discussion. We hope that if you enjoy it, you will consider supporting, and you guys can say if you have one yourself, either a Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, or contact directly. Doing so gets you access to our Discord, which is the place we share most of our PDF content that we will create, have created a little bit now, and will create more in the future. So that is that. Our current goal for the channel is to get to 100 subs, not 100 subs. We're already past that. To get to $100 worth of support a month through any of those avenues I mentioned to hit that milestone that we want to this time. And however long that takes, that's the current milestone. As it stands right now, we are thinking about doing some giveaways of our normal giveaways is like a game session or something like that. Since it's $100, we may do a multi-shot type of thing. And then also considering getting some custom dice made to give away. Maybe if we overshoot the $100 a month thing, we might just have to get some custom metal dice made. So, yeah, thinking about that. So, that's my announcements mainly, aside from this being a collaboration with, this time, 3 different channels. So let's go ahead and let them introduce themselves. We will start with our longtime collaborator, co-buddy, Dan.
Hello, everyone. Dan from Avenue Studios. Jake sends his apologies. He wasn't able to join in tonight. He's got a full day and a full night going, but he sent my notes, so they'll be coming up. Of course, I'm very excited to be in the second month of our collaboration with Inn of Planar Crossroads. We'll be doing our Forest Forge, where we build a one-shot based around what we talk about here on Around the Hearth in Foundry, and then we'll play test it at the end of the month. Of course, patrons and local supporters of our channel, Avenue Studios, will get to be a part of that. There's a raffle, and winners of that get to play in the live stream. So check us out over there as we go back and forth between Around the Hearth and Force Forge. We live stream Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern. And we have our main campaigns on Friday nights coming out, and some special stuff on Thursdays now, too. So check us out over there. And thank you, Adam, for having me on. I'm really excited to chat with everybody. This is going to be great.
Beans. All right, and then we have he whose mech was EMP'd last time, but now is here, Josh from
Copper Dragon Games. Glad to be here. Happy to be in the discussion. Lots of cool things coming up on my channel as well. Although I've been on a little bit of a hiatus due to some outside of YouTube things, but ready to jump back in. Lots of 5e content coming up. I used to say Dungeons and Dragons, but now we're on the alt Dungeons and Dragons game plan. I'm actually going to be taking a swing at my own take on 5e, which now that I've announced it publicly, I have to actually do it and finish that document up and put it out, right? So a little motivation for myself here. Put my feet to the fire. But excited to be here. Glad to be a part of this chat.
All right. Well, appropriate that you've come to Around the Hearth to put your feet to the fire, so there you go.
Indeed.
And you've got till April, because this doesn't come out till then. So there you go.
Hopefully it'll be live by then.
There
That's
you go.
The goal.
Oh, sweet, dude. I can't wait.
So if you try out Copper Dragon Games system take in the future, why don't you come back to this video and put it in the comments? So there you go.
Yes.
All right. And then our newest guest, Wesley from
DM Tales. Thanks for having me on.
Mm-hmm.
So I run YouTube channel, DM Tales. I also do have a website where I'm doing some written reviews up for games, and I do like to do fictionalized narratives for some of my sessions. So I'll write them out as short stories, which I do every now and again, which is a lot of fun. And I tend to do a lot of reviews of some more OSR games and some lesser known stuff that I really enjoy. And I am going to be doing, this will be airing after that, but I'm going to be doing my first actual play live stream next week as of this recording. So I'm really excited about that. So,
And that'll be on your channel?
That'll be on my channel on DM Tales. So I'm rapidly learning Arcan Forge in order to make the game run smoothly, and setting up OBS Ninja in order to bring my players in to stream, and setting up a third-party dice roller. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Mm-hmm. But thanks for having me on.
Yes. Good to have fellow friends on. So, let me see. There's a Tolkien channel I watch. It says Navaya Melanin. So, welcome, friends. All right. But that would get close to a shout out, which is usually Levi's job. But
we are packed enough with people. I think we're good.
Yes. So I'll move this over real quick so we can get it on the stream. This is what DM Tales, who is our newest guest this time, this is what his channel looks like. And I especially appreciate that he did an Open Legend review of the system. And he is also, let me see, his most recent thing is the Arcan Forge Quick Peek. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At least of recording. So
yes, at least a recording. Yep.
All right. Well, with all that done, I think announcements and shout out is done, which means come on in, travelers. Rest your bones by the fire, put your feet up to the hearth, and grab your preferred beverage as we discuss low fantasy. Specifically this time, low fantasy and low magic. So next time we'll give an example that, if you wanted a preview, it's in the episode bloopers and outtakes of this one. But this time we're going to be talking about low fantasy, low magic. Next time we'll be talking about low fantasy, high magic. And then the third chat we'll do is rare magic in a low fantasy system, in a low fantasy setting. And then the final one we'll do for April is dangerous magic in a low fantasy setting. So, does anybody have any itchy topic points that they want to put in there first as we dive into low fantasy, low magic?
Well, as we were discussing before the actual recording button got turned on, what we mean by low fantasy, and I think low magic is a lot more obvious in meaning, but in this case, low fantasy is saying that the world is a low fantasy world, as opposed to maybe per se the game itself being low fantasy, and that you have a world that, in your term, is normal-ish, so it seems like magic is not integrated throughout the society as a whole. But there are magical elements that kind of come into the world. So this includes things with, like, secret magic societies, or, like, you go from a normal world, but, like, magic undead start appearing. So the magic elements intrude on an otherwise non-magical world.
Mm-hmm. I think we kind of settled on that, like I said, in the blooper portion. And that works well because you can do a lot of different things. And I think it's good to clarify in this point, when we're talking low fantasy, we are not defining any specific time period. you can have low fantasy in any time period of our Earth, or even past our Earth if you want to do some kind of sci-fi low fantasy. But usually you're doing a kind of different feel in a game when you're doing that, but I have seen it done other ways. So that might be a good place to start for a discussion, is picking your time period, because that's going to affect how magic might be treated in your game. So if you're setting it in like when they were burning witches at the stake and stuff like that, that would be a very different feel to this low fantasy, low magic game that you're playing. Whereas if you did something modern, I mean, they're in America, we're using that as a base, or at least I am in this example. There are people who practice Wicca all the time, and nobody does any, there's no active burning of witches at the stake. And that's a very easy kind of difference that you'll see there, a very stark difference that you'll see there, depending on what time period you decide to set your game in. So why don't we start with a run on that? Does anybody have ideas or comments regarding things that popped to their head about considerations for picking the time period for your low fantasy game?
Well, it's a really great point, because I didn't think about it. I think a lot of times when you hear low fantasy, we were talking beforehand, I immediately go to low magic just with that assumption when I hear low fantasy. And then on top of that, I totally go like Conan Barbarian or something like that. So that's a really good point, that it really doesn't matter. Because then I thought, when you were talking about it, I thought something like Dresden Files, or something where it's modern day, but with fantasy elements. So it's something we talked about during March of the Mechs too, of looking at what theme do you want, what themes do you want, and of course your players, what are your players looking to play? Because you're so right that depending on where you pick it, drastically different game is going to unfold in a story, like a modern day setting, or like I love Wolf Among Us, the Telltale game. So that's kind of there. It's not quite low fantasy, but with the fairy tale creatures, you could pull it back a little bit. I do love those games, doing something film noir style with a low fantasy setting, where there's just a little peppering in there, a little magic, just to keep things interesting. So that would be setting a kind of a mood and a vibe for the whole game, and potentially what's the goal in your story you want to tell, or the challenges you want to have for the players, and thinking about, depending on the time setting, and not just that, also you don't necessarily have to be Earth, but we're looking at something Earth-like, normal-ish, like Levi said, would bring with the expectations that you could either look at leaning into or subverting, depending on what you want out of your game, what you want to surprise your players with. So that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, when Levi had brought up the whole notion of it being like an Earth-like world, it was a normal world, it readjusted my entire thinking on what I was going to talk about for the topic. Because low fantasy is actually what most people who do fantasy nowadays, or at least younger folks, are familiar with. Everything, because you could make a feasible argument to put the MCU as low fantasy. Because
superheroes,
99.9% of the world does not have access to Iron Man's technology, right? So, but you have wizards running around, and most people are still just using their iPhones and not caring. But then you have Harry Potter, and you have Teen Wolf, and you have the Twilight Saga, and so many people are familiar with low fantasy in a modern setting, and they're not even aware that that's what they're doing. So it'd be really kind of cool as a GM to develop a game that's pinging off of stuff that they already know, and bring up to folks as like, yeah, you're doing a fantasy game, and they have and blow their minds. Maybe 2 or 3 sessions in, suddenly like, oh, and by the way, now this thing goes whizzing across the screen at you. What? It was like, oh yeah, this is a fantasy world. What? I think that would be really kind of cool, because the players' expectations are so there. It would be fun to play with.
I think it would be cool to do a game in low fantasy that kind of mimicked the structure of the X-Files, where you have like a truly normal setting, except that there are all these weird things happening, and if you set the PCs as the ones who are supposed to go out and investigate those strange happenings and figure out what's going on with those, I think that gives a really sound structure for incorporating that, but keeping the setting itself normalish, so to speak.
Yeah.
That there's a reason, or even my brain go. I know it's sci-fi instead of technically fantasy, but there's the old quote about any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. I can't remember who said that, but somebody smarter than me, I'm sure.
Sagan. I think it's Sagan, right? So
possibly. Now that you say that, now I'm wondering if I know the quote from some other source and just never bothered to look to see who said it the first time.
Everybody quotes everybody else anyway.
Right, exactly.
Find me on
Writer
Facebook.
Arthur
Abraham
C.
Lincoln.
Clarke.
It's
Arthur
Clark.
C.
Thank
Clarke.
you.
Oh,
I know
yeah,
somebody.
Clark.
You got it.
Yeah. I did know. I just, yeah.
Levi, did you look that up or did you just know it?
Oh, I looked it up.
Okay.
That makes me
See-
feel better about myself. Thank
Well, Levi doesn't have a camera on, see, so he gets to do all that type of clickety-click behind the
yeah.
scenes stuff.
I do. I like it. I gestured at you with my hand, not having a camera, as in, please go on. Sorry, I looked up the factual thing.
Oh,
I love you.
So, I mean, you guys touching on that, there's, especially with the X-Files type of reference, and then Supernatural comes to mind. You can do that paranormal
favorite.
investigators. I also would
Yes.
recommend I guess, lesser known one. It's Warehouse 13.
Love
Excellent.
that show.
Oh, you know it. Good.
Dude,
Oh,
I
yeah.
know
Good
that
ones.
too, yeah.
I think I've
Oh.
seen the thumbnail. I haven't watched it. I need to write this down.
You
Yeah.
must watch. Yeah,
It is a
so
lot
great.
of fun. And it is absolutely great for MacGuffin-based episodic D&D type of tabletop game type of inspiration, because that's basically what they do. They hunt things down, and there's this mixture of
Yes.
technology and then the magic behind certain objects and how it's more like a psychic type of magic, like importance is placed upon it by a person, and then that expands out based upon things. So actually,
Interesting.
low fantasy, low magic is a really ripe setting for something with psychic type of influences, either in the near future or in the near past, is a really fun one to go for. And of course, you can always do that with a Cthulhu type of situation. So
I was
you go.
actually going to say that for a lot of these games that you're hypothesizing in this sort of realm, like the Call of Cthulhu system is very much so building a normal person who has to deal with the supernatural. Like, if you, for the theme of like a more, like we started this with X-Files, right? I feel like if you turned down the consequences and sanity issues in the Call of Cthulhu system, it would not be hard to get yourself to being like X-Files investigators as a group who have to be like normal in the magic part of the world as opposed to in a magic world.
Mm-hmm.
And then every so
And
often make it something normal to throw them off their game.
And there's systems that are designed to kind of do this too, although they're mostly based off of Stranger Things at this point. You have Dark Places and Demogorgons, and Kids on Bikes, and Chris Gonnerman just came out with Iron Falcon 75, which is, it takes the Iron Falcon core rules and puts it literally into, I think it's Kentucky in 1975, and he created a whole set of rules for how magic works in this world, and there's like different tiers of how magic works in different spaces, and it's really, I really want him to expand on it a little more, because it was really cool what he did. But it's got that X-Files vibe to it. You're just like, you're fish out of water, and suddenly, wait a minute, this light spell works, what's going on now? And so suddenly you're Mulder. That's pretty cool.
I have two thoughts on that. One just thrown out, and then another one I'd love to hear what you guys think, riffing off of it. One is I think we we've already started to mention it too, is what it's the chicken or the egg, the system or the setting. Which are you picking first? I think they're going to influence it, because depending on which one you're feeling more inspired by, there are so many options out there for systems to accommodate that. Flip side, like Levi said, taking a system, just doing some tweaks doesn't take too much to then craft a setting for you. So that's just something to think about too.
I've never played a Cthulhu game. So
I haven't either.
Neither have I.
I would love to. Hey.
Yeah.
Dan, you want to DM or GM a Call of Cthulhu game?
Well, it was Levi's suggestion, so I think maybe Levi.
And by the sounds of it, I'm the only one who's played Call of Cthulhu.
That would be awesome.
No, I've never ran it. So I'd have to do some reading.
Look at his icon. He looks ready.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But seriously, well, and then the other thought, now I'm all excited about that. I'm going to set that aside for now. The other thought I had was, what I think we're talking about or hitting on is the difference between probably with 5e and other heroic style games of having more normal characters. We're going to an older school. I'm thinking of George MacDonald's Fantasties and stuff, or Lord of the Rings with the hobbits being these normal people in an extraordinary world. Does that vibe best with low fantasy? What do you guys think about that? Because I like having come into things. Came into it later with 5th edition and stuff. I'm used to the more heroic. And so I have this interest in wanting to go back to the old ways, trying that out of being the normal people trying to survive in this extraordinary world. So I'm very interested in that. But where do you guys think, especially if you have more experience in the old school games, of where that falls with low fantasy?
Well, the thing with old, like OSR type of things, with the first introduction of D&D and things like that, from what I understand, it's mainly Ed Greenwood's Forgotten Realms that is this way, but that's kind of become the default setting. But I know for sure his is this way, that it is called the Forgotten Realms because we Earthlings have forgotten that these realms exist elsewhere, type of thing. So that's the idea behind the name of Forgotten Realms, in which is contained the Sword Coast and Baldur's Gate and all that type of stuff. So in that idea, I think that you have an argument to be made in the OSR and other types of games like that for this is a low fantasy, low magic, even though there are other fantasy races. I think you could make an argument even that the third age of Lord of the Rings, like you said, actually leans more towards the low fantasy, low magic than like the second or first, especially the first age. So as they went down the ages of Middle Earth, you see this decline of magic, of its high fantasy of it. And it becomes a lower fantasy with a lower level of magic. Because, sure, Gandalf's magic, and yes, he's technically not even human, he's a Maiar, but he's not out there, laying waste with huge fireballs all the time, because there's this idea that it's somewhat taxing, or that there's this labor-intensive nature of working with magic or working through that, and sometimes how it's not even specifically stated that there's magic happening, but everything is just clicking together correctly.
Yeah, I mean, Galadriel even tells Sam she's not even quite sure what he means by magic at one point.
Right.
Like, you wanted to see magic, I guess this would qualify. Like, go look into my mirror and see the Shire burning. But
there you go, buddy.
Yeah, there you go. Good times. But she wasn't quite sure what they meant, right? Because it seemed like the culture had moved so far in a different direction from what the elves just considered normal, and now this is magic to the later races, which was kind of a cool way of looking at it. It was fun. One of the series that handles that with the fantasy races in the normal world, if you read the prequels to the Shannara, Sword of Shannara books, it's like our world post-apocalyptic. So you're like almost Mad Max-ish, but there's still just a little bit of elements running around. And there's this guy who gets tasked to go and gather people to basically go to the Four Lands in Shannara. And one of the people tells him, it's like, oh yeah, and there'll be some elves. And he's like, elves? What? Like, what? They've just been here the whole time. Nobody knew they were there. And that was the way he handled it. It was like, oh, okay, that would work. But that's low fantasy. That really is kind of cool.
Right. That's really cool.
I think that does actually bring up another point that I wanted to hit on is you don't have to get rid of fantasy races to have a low fantasy game. You just have to be like, okay, like Shadowrun does the thing where there's this portal that's opened up and now there's this rift or whatever that has opened up and now there's these individuals who either become that way or are themselves orcish or elvish or this or that. And you can do that, or you can do something that might be even more intriguing and just say that these things are always there. Like, let's look like a house elf or a brownie. Brownies are really good examples. They're there in this setting, but no one uses the magic right. The magic is intricate and subtle. Subtle magic is a wonderful way of weaving into your story a almost soft quality to the way the magic works while still having these huge intricate designs of a hard magic system. What do you offer to the brownie and how do you offer it? Does it have to be in a specific bowl? And you get this hard magic type of thing, but it's for a soft magic that you're wanting to accomplish. And I'm sure we'll be discussing hard and soft magics beforehand also, because Copper Dragon brought that up. So this idea of old fae magic, or magic of the old world type of thing that was brought over, or tribal magic that you're incorporating into your story and stuff like that. There's lots of little things to do that way.
That's cool. I would actually think too, off of the having just any species. I've been reading Redwall to my boys currently, and Redwall is a low fantasy setting with low magic. I was just thinking about that as I'm reading it because they have a little bits of magic in there. It's very weapon based, a little bit almost Conan feel. But granted, it's talking animals, but nobody's super magical. They even reference a lot of Earth stuff, like Satan and hell all the time, which I find hilarious.
It's normal-ish, right? It's
normal-ish.
Normal-ish.
Yes.
The word of the day.
There you go. That's the comment of the day of this particular one. Put normal-ish in the comments if you watch all the way. So
that's another setting I've always wanted to run a game in. I think it would be great, but totally low fantasy.
I should tell you that I've been at least in a Redwall one-shot. It was a good time.
That's awesome.
Is there a game? Did someone come out with a system for it, or did you just hack? Was it a hack system?
It was a double hack.
Nice.
So
Okay.
it was a Lord of the Rings hack of 5e that we then extra hacked to make it into Redwall.
They had to run an Ocean's 11 game first to get to the Redwall game.
Well, no, it's more that
I know I have that headache.
That's
well, because the
awesome,
thing
dude.
is, right, Lord of the Rings as a setting for every character, you're assuming is like maybe interacts with some magic, but does not have any of their own,
Yeah.
Mhm.
which is also
Yeah.
true for Redwall.
Okay.
The only thing we've really had to do, there actually was, I believe, a Redwall races hack that we used. So they made their own, like, badger and things of that nature. And we just took those and used it with the Lord of the Rings 5e stuff.
That actually sounds like a fun
That
hack.
is really interesting.
Mhm.
It was. It was fun. I was a blacksmith of a badger. It was a good time.
Ooh, nice.
Nice.
Who's a badger
Very
smith?
good.
Squirrels all the way.
a bet.
Yeah.
Squirrels are chaotic. They have to be.
So the comment there that kind of struck me, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think, is when you talked about how the characters don't inherently have magic, but are expected during the game to interact with it. When you're doing low fantasy, low magic, there's you could have like the X-Files where you have normal people who are interacting with the strange. You could also approach it from more of a, I guess, like a Men in Black side, where your PCs are the ones who know about all the magic but are trying to keep it hidden from the commoners, if that makes sense. I wonder, which would you prefer, and what are your thoughts on deciding which take you would choose for a setting, or not a setting but a campaign?
I've never run a low magic campaign, so my inclination is to go more towards they know about it and they can access it a little bit. More like a Buffy situation where like the characters start out, they're just like ordinary teenagers, and then they're spellcasting and dating demons by the end. I don't know how that works. But that's kind quickly. Of like
no. They're teenagers. It escalated just about the right amount.
That's a fair assessment.
It is a very good assessment. So I kind of lean more like that. But on the other hand, I've never run a low fantasy campaign where people are just kind of like swimming through stuff and things appear. So I don't know. Like I get back to the Cthulhu thing. That would be kind of interesting for me. Maybe I would want to play in the one where you don't have access to magic. But the way my brain is wired, I would almost have to run it with the one where they do, because I'm just so used to it. It'd be kind of fun. I want to do Scooby-Doo. That's what I want to do.
Scooby-Doo.
That'd be fun.
Depending on the iteration of Scooby-Doo, it's a non-fantasy setting.
That's
correct.
true.
The 60s cartoon is not fantasy, but the live-action movies are definitely low fantasy.
Yes. So when we're breaking this down, I think if you have characters who know what the magic is, right? The tension isn't the strangeness, the weirdness. They almost always should have most of the tools to fight, even if it's a struggle. But it brings in, like, in a lot of times in like superhero media, the real struggle isn't just fighting the enemy. The real struggle is making sure no one else gets hurt while you do it. Right? So I think a benefit here is that if you have...
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. If you're playing with people who are, let's say, strongly averse to having their own character deaths, but you still need stakes and something interesting, I feel like the sort of social drama, the risk to other people who don't know that there's the ticking time bomb of whatever magic space XYZ thingamabobs in the room, and they're just going around, having a nice ice cream social, and that like the one person who's serving the ice cream is about to like psionically blow up and take all of their minds somewhere. I don't know.
It's kind of
so
like
there's this.
It's kind of like Kay said on Men in Black. There's always a Carillion death ray or a galactic battleship. It's that they don't know about it.
Yeah.
So it's an entirely different flavor, where most of the tension is what could happen to other people. Because if your characters needed to, they could be like, well, this was a loss. Like, we couldn't avoid this, now we just need to clean up the scene around it. Worst case.
Somebody get the neuralizer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whereas in the case where they are the non-magic interacting with the magic, I feel like that's intrinsically a lot scarier. And also has a lot more exploration. Because it's very much so you don't know what's possible in this world. Anything I feel like could throw at you, where in the more Men in Black situation, they expect to have a reasonable grasp, if not quite knowing everything. They have like a general ballpark for each thing they interact with.
Well, so and that's what made Men in Black work is that we had that fish out of water character to be our vantage point.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That's
Kay was
true.
he
Very
had no
true.
idea, like it would have had no drama otherwise, which is why the later ones got boring. So yeah, you're right. I like that.
There you go.
Yeah,
And that brings
that's
it back too a little bit to the hard versus soft magic too. In if your protagonists, if your PCs have access, then you almost you tend to lean more toward a hard magic because magic needs to be more well defined because they're going to be using it. Whereas if you're just exploring it and you're interacting it with it, but the PCs don't use it themselves, it can be that more vague narrative element where you never necessarily have to see the mechanics of it. It's just a force, a narrative force, rather than something that has to be on a character sheet, so to speak.
That's true.
Yeah, I've seen at least one system, Brindlewood Bay, kind of splits the difference on it.
Oh yeah.
Because your characters, it's Murder She Wrote meets Call of Cthulhu, which is really what, and it's run by Powered by the Apocalypse.
I'm already
still
intrigued.
Kind of grasp how it works. But you're investigating a cult that's trying to bring about the end of the world, and it says during the like in the rulebook that you're one of the characters, and you're all playing like retired old ladies. But one
I
of
am
them
so on board
might,
with this right now.
We get some Golden
if-
Girls vibes too.
It really
Yes.
is. But someone they're investigating this cult that can do magic, and eventually you might want to start using it, but it has a cost to how your character functions. So there's a cost to it. So it's soft magic but you can use it, but there is a mechanic to kind of explain a little bit. I need to go back and read the rule book.
I so wish I could have
seen.
seen Angela Lansbury busting some chops on some, cultists, bring in the Murder She Wrote smackdown. I tell you.
It really is. It's an interesting system. I have to get my brain around Powered by the Apocalypse in order to run it, because I want to run it for my neighbors. But it's all set up like a TV show. So you're like, we don't do the traveling from one bit to the other. We just go here, and now we're cutting, and now you're on top of the cliff, and the person's pointing a gun at you. What do you do? Oh no!
Yeah.
End scene.
Interesting.
So it's fun.
Well, and then you have a flashback to when you put your mother's flask in your right breast pocket. And
Which
that's
is
why
the system.
Yes, it's like a mechanical flashback is for explaining things is a part of it.
It's really cool.
Fascinating.
I generally prefer crunchier systems, so I feel like I need a jungle gym for my Jello brain to set on, so I have a structure to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's not enough of a structure for my personal brain. But I feel like for people who don't want as much structure, it's a great system for a lot of fun with that. It's just got to be at the right level of crunch for your brain mush.
Well,
the way that I've described it is, it's a game that I will play but not run. Because I'm like you, Levi. I need to have more structure to be able to run the game. But I could play it because I can just run around and ruin the GM's day, and that's a good time. But it's low fantasy, which is really cool.
That is one play style.
All right. So, two things then.
That's great.
First off, I think that both Levi and Wesley are implying that their brains are gelatinous cubes, considering they're not degrading the jungle gym. and secondly, guys, it's already past time probably for final thoughts.
That's true.
Final thoughts for this one. So I'll start us off like I usually do to let our new guys understand what final thoughts means that you give us your last 1 point that you want to bring up, and then we discuss it very quickly. So, final thought for me: cantrips and items magical cantrips and items become incredibly useful in a no magic system, in a low magic fantasy. So don't be afraid to have those items that a character in a low fantasy, low magic setting is going to be impressed when they see the broom sweeping the floor for the wizard, or for this hag this old lady that they just found in the swamp, this hoodoo woman. How does she do that? Did it actually move, or was it just my imagination? So play around with that. Don't be afraid to incorporate that. And that's my final thought for that. Make those. Having the items there is great. Having the magic there is fine. But if you keep it low magic and just enough to whet the appetite, it can be very encouraging and interesting for your players. All right. So let's go. Let me see. Dan, what's your final thought?
I think my final thought is looking at let me rephrase. My final thought is that there's so many options. That's what I'm realizing by talking with everybody, because take the moment when you're prepping for your game and starting to think about it don't just go with the first thought you have on low fantasy. Sit and think about it for a while, because there's all these options we just went through, that it's not just the low fantasy ancient medieval style game with a few magical items in there. It could be anything all the way up to modern times into sci-fi, and it could still have that low fantasy feel. There's a lot of options there. Take your time to think about what you want from that game. What are the things you want, and find that system and setting that's gonna hit that. There's so much. I think what I've realized in talking with everybody is that there's so many options within low fantasy. I think we hear low, and there's that subconscious negative connotation, maybe I'm just talking for me too. It's just, you hear low fantasy, it's like, no, there's actually a ton of options. It can be really cool because it opens the doors to many different things. And of course, comment below your favorite low fantasy setting or low fantasy system. I would love to hear what people are using out there, or if they've tried some of these things that we've mentioned during the chat. RPG stories are the best. Thank you.
All right. Josh, what do you got?
Well, Dan just kind of stole mine, but that's okay. I won't hold it against you.
Same thing, best friends.
Yes, I was gonna point out, like, this is a great opportunity to get away from like traditional Tolkien-esque fantasy and that medieval time period and explore other options. So I'm gonna break from that, and I'm just gonna say, in the history of my gaming experience, one of my favorite supplements is actually kind of a low fantasy supplement, and that was the Urban Arcana book from the D20 Modern line back in I don't know what year it was, maybe like 07 or something. I don't know, back in those days, the 3.5 era. But
long ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. But really cool book that kind of goes through lots of different modern takes on magic and how you can incorporate those into a modern setting where you're playing on Earth essentially, but there are things like wizards and paladins and whatever going on in and around your party. And I haven't read that in years, so I may be misrepresenting it a little bit, but I have very fond memories of that book. And if you haven't seen it, it's a good read.
All right. What you got, Wesley?
I'm going to actually take a cue from Low Fantasy Gaming, the game, and say that if you're going to have a magic item or an artifact, give it a name. Don't necessarily have to give it a personality, but give it a name and make it unique. And if you're not going to throw out swords and daggers and armor and whatnot, like all throughout the campaign, where you're just like, well, that's a +2 sword, and I'm going to discard my +1 sword because now I have this, like a video game. You can have it grow over time with the character, and you can narrate it and say that the artifact is starting to get in tune with you, and is now you're kind of opening up the magic more and more as you grow. And that's one of the really cool things that I like about that system. So, and it's something I really want to start incorporating more in my other games.
That's awesome. That's an easy thing to do in any system too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's
very
great.
universally applicable. Good advice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Levi, any final thoughts?
My final thought would have to be, if you are doing a specifically low fantasy, low magic game, maybe avoid a system that often assumes high magic, because in my experience, players will feel frustrated with the restriction of access. Maybe if you have players who you already know are pretty okay with you having games that restrict a lot of options, but being like, hey, even a paladin is too magical for this game, because they get leveled spells all on their own, is the sort of feeling that you either need to have already gotten buy-in for, or just know that you have players who are open to everything. So I would generally say default to a system that is more accepting of that without having to, like, strip out a lot of the existing options.
Indeed.
That's a really good point. I was just thinking it while you were talking. I was thinking, like, if you did 5e, like if you tried to do D&D, low magic, low, like would you have all your players be fighters and rogues and barbarians and cut every other class? Like that's
and half
that
the
sounds
classes.
awful. Yeah. Pick a better system at that point, right?
Yeah.
I was just watching a
really
Nerdarchy. I was just watching a Nerdarchy video where they made that exact point.
Yep.
Oh, did they?
Fighters, rogues,
Nice.
barbarians, and nothing else is allowed. Cut the subclasses where you can access magic. There you go. Okay. Sounds terrible.
Everybody's like, what the heck?
Yeah.
What are we
Well,
playing?
my 2 cents on that is also you can use class caps. So if you want a little magic, but not if you want low magic but not high magic, they can be those normal classes and then have a multi-class option later. Pathfinder 2e would probably be better for this type of thing because you can take a feat. So you may allow them to have a feat, that multi-class paladin feat instead of other things. And don't be afraid to use time and training options to incorporate that instead of them just outright becoming those things. So everybody starts a warrior or a rogue or you could even start a bard and just make sure that you cap out their spell cast. You say you can be a level 2 or 3 bard, and that's it. You can be a level 2 or 3 paladin, that's it. Those magic classes cap out, but you allow the non-magical classes that they are to continue to grow, barring magical abilities.
Okay, that's an interesting take.
That is an interesting take. I kind of like that idea.
Well, probably a lot of players would end up multi-classing.
It would encourage
campaign.
multi-classing, yeah.
That would be interesting, yeah.
All right, so now with that, we are set to go into our next chat, but that means we have to say goodbye for this one. So we hope you enjoyed. Do remember that you can support, let me see. I know that Copper Dragon Games has a Patreon, correct?
Right.
All right. What about Wesley?
Yes, I do have a Patreon for DM Tales that you can access through my website. I'm very, very grateful for all the support. It helps me keep me in games to review, really, and pays for the website.
There you go. And of course, Avenue Studios, Dan, they have their stuff on Patreon or Locals, and the Planar Crossroads, as I said before, has Patreon, Local, Subscribestar, or direct contact, and I bet these guys would be all right with you directly contacting them anyway. So you can do that through their contact information. But, as always, have a great day, God bless, and enjoy. Bye.
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 See ya.
This content was made possible by travelers and viewers like you. Thank you.
All right. Solid start to the chat, gents.
That was
a
great.
trip. Thanks.
Yep.
A quick note: the Urban Arcana book was released in 2003.
2003.
That's like
Dude,
almost
What
right
did
at
I
the
say?
start, isn't
What did I
it?
That's-
guess? I don't
you-
remember.
I don't remember
2007?
anymore.
You just
Seven?
2007, which means that's
Only 4 years off.
only 4 years off,
I mean-
but 20 years out. So, think about that.
I know that.
I'm so
that doesn't
old.
sound that. I know.
I walked away from the hobby in 2E and came back in 5E. So
Oh, dude,
Mm.
that's a big
I walked
change.
in, like, it was a very
Yeah.
big change. I'm like, what happened? Why is everybody casting spells? I don't understand. Nobody's dying.
What do you mean you can be a rogue or you can be an elf or a rogue? I don't understand what's going on here. All right.
Oh my gosh.
So, quick break for everybody, and then we will come
Sure.
back and get started on the second
What time do we go to?
one. We go until we're done. We'll do another 30-minute chat here for low fantasy high magic, and then 2 more.
Another 30-minute, as it's.
Okay.
So we got.
We ran a little long.
Okay.
We did
With
go
the
long
with
on
the time change today, I got to get to bed early, or otherwise tomorrow is going to be a lot of fun.
Yep.
So
Okay.
Why wouldn't you want it to be fun?
Yeah. So quick.
Well, if you ever need to drop out, that is fully understand.
Yes.
I'm actually enjoying
Absolutely.
myself, so I'll do the risk that I'll be the guy up in front of the church tomorrow drooling, which will be good. So
You
I
sit
do
at
the
the
light
front
tap.
and
That always
only
works
the
real
preacher
well.
will see you. If you sit up front,
Yeah.
only the
I-
preacher
I-
sees you.
I actually am the preacher.
I don't
so-
think you
so
should be
everybody
drooling
sees
up
me.
front then. That might not be the best
Just-
advisable thing.
You're just slain in the spirit. That's all.
Turn
I'm just
turn to Mark.
he's speaking in tongues, but Wes doesn't believe in that. Doesn't matter.
All right. Bathroom break real quick, and then we will come back for the next chat.
Cool.
Sounds good.